This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. I love these kinds of conversations. Digging into the health. My health, your health. Let me get somebody on this show who can tell us something we don't know to hopefully give us a better life, let us live a little bit longer, enjoy our life more. My guest today, Will Cole, is a guy who knows something about that. Today we are talking about his new book, Intuitive Fasting. And trust me, on a conversation like this, I can ask Will questions forever. Specifically, how to fast. What's the difference contrasted to caloric restriction? Intermittent fasting means what exactly? I mean, diving into the nitty-gritty, I want to know because, damn it, I want to keep improving. So everything I ask on an episode like this is really my personal desires. And hopefully, everyone out there has got something similar going on in their own mind, just like I do. So without any further delay, let's jump right in with Will Cole and talk a little bit about health, the full spectrum of health, and specifically this contrast between caloric restriction and intermittent fasting. Without any further delay, let's jump right in, and I hope you enjoy this conversation with Will Cole. Big picture, I don't think there's an easy answer, and I want you to give me something that doesn't sound like you and I are going to go down the politically correct path. But why in blazes is my home country, America, so obese? What's gone wrong, Will?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things going wrong. Let's talk about the turn of the 20th century and the way that the food industry marketed to the United States and the people. And over the course of the 20th century, we had a really abandonment of what we evolved with. Researchers estimate that the majority of our genetics haven't changed in 10,000 years, but yet our world over the 20th century changed very dramatically in a very short period of time. When you're putting that into context with the totality of human history, there's this chasm, this mismatch between genetics and epigenetics. So that's really at the heart of what researchers are exploring, of why we have these chronic metabolic issues, or this larger insulin resistance spectrum, from weight loss resistance and obesity to metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance and prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. That's that larger continuum of insulin resistance. That's the leading cause of weight gain and obesity in the United States. And it's estimated that 50% of the United States has this problem somewhere on the spectrum.
Let me keep you at the coming into the 20th century, and let me just throw out my distant look at it. You're talking essentially what we ate over the last 120 years. If we're just going to keep it in America, but it's happening around the world. And that would be a lot of, let's say, not fresh stuff and a lot of, frankly, white bread. Just a lot of white bread everywhere, cereals, these kinds of things. Is that where you're going at in terms of what we ate? Just kind of multiplied in the last, let's say, 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a diet that's devoid of nutrients or very low in nutrients. It's mismatched with our biochemistry. So you have this epigenetic, the food that we eat in this example, and our genetics, our genes are in many ways are living in this brave new world and are eating things that it hasn't evolved with. And it's triggering these genetic predispositions that have been there for 10,000 years, but are being awoken like never before because of this onslaught of stressors. And it's not just food, but food's a major part of that, because that's breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snacks in between of things that really disrupt homeostasis in the body. That it disrupts the microbiome. It throws a cascade of imbalance systemically, raising inflammation, raising insulin, throwing off our blood sugar, disrupting our microbiome. Look at what's going on globally as far as climate change and what is seen from a planetary standpoint, it's happening on an individual basis as well because of this mismatch. We have this personal global warming going on in the form of chronic inflammation, and that's what insulin resistance is. The receptor sites on the cell are blunted, meaning insulin can't get on the cell. So it raises blood sugar, raises inflammation, things like C-reactive protein, because the body is thrown out of balance. So that is the problem. We are damaging our body and we're throwing our body out of balance.
It can get really complicated. It can get political. There can be differences of opinion. But there's no doubt, as we're establishing right now, that what we've eaten for the last 120 years or so has been a real change than, let's say, the prior 10,000, as you make the point. One of the things that strikes me, and I'm calling you from Saigon, Vietnam today, which happens to be the least obese country in the world compared to my home country, the most obese country in the world. And it's been a really interesting thing for me to watch in the last 8 years. Frankly, it is a society that I've been in where people do eat a lot more vegetables. Even though they love their banh mi, it's far less on the white bread spectrum than America. So it's been a really fascinating contrast for me. I wonder, we can look at what we've eaten part. The part that strikes me too, and I want your view on this, is the mental side. I mean, for example, last year in 2020, I'm 52 years old. I lost 25 pounds, right around 195 right now. I work out a lot of yoga, a lot of high intensity stuff. There's a side of me that keeps saying, well, gosh, okay, yeah, we're eating really bad in the States, but what about the mental side? What's happened to us there where we don't look in the mirror anymore and see what we should see, which is just an expanding waistline? Speak to me about your experience, about where we're thinking right now, because I sometimes really have this, as I lay out all this background about me, I have this feeling of like we're making too many excuses for us Americans.
I agree with that. I think that it's multifaceted. It's not just about the food, as I kind of referred to it before. It's these non-food inflammers as well, that people are chronically stressed. We have the rise of modernity, which has brought us a lot of great things. I mean, we're talking across the world right now and we're connecting to people across the world. That's a blessing and that's an amazing advancement of modern times. But it comes with a price tag for many people because it's really unfettered, unchecked, unregulated. It's addictive for many people. It's designed to distract and it's designed to numb. I think that a lot of people, if you've ever seen that Pixar film WALL-E, I walk around sometimes at airports and public spaces and you kind of think, well, this film wasn't that far off. I think we're headed down this direction of being entirely glued to screens. It is preventing us from taking action in the present moment because we're constantly numbing ourselves and distracting ourselves. So I think that's part of it. And then at the same time, you have this wave of, as you mentioned, excuses as to why we are in the place that we're at, because it makes people feel better. To shirk responsibility makes people feel better. But the reality is we have a responsibility for ourselves, and we have a responsibility collectively as a society as well, because what we're doing isn't working. You can't look at the statistics of what's going on right now, where 50% of the United States has a major blood sugar problem and a metabolic issue, and these are largely reversible, overcomable, healable, dealable with things, but we have to do something different to see something different. And you know that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly, expecting a different result. And I find that many people are on this hamster wheel and they are distracting themselves because they don't want to go there and fix these things. But it's something that I, as a functional medicine practitioner, focus on the individual and for the people that are awakening up for themselves and realizing, you know what I'm doing isn't working for me and I have to change course to see something different. So I see this amazing awakening that's happening. It's still not the majority of people. Over my past 11, 12 years of clinical practice, I've seen the growth, more and more people. What I said 12 years ago was more radical. The idea that type 2 diabetes and these chronic health problems are reversible and preventable, and there's a lot of influence that you wield on your biochemistry, was more radical back then, even just a decade ago. But I don't see the pushback that I saw back then now. I think more and more people are realizing and waking up to the fact that, you know what, I don't want to end up where my parents were or where my grandparents. I want to have agency over my health. They're wanting to have their responsibility. They want to take responsibility for their health.
Let's dive in, though, now that we've kind of laid out 10 minutes of the state of the union, so to speak. Let's talk about some of the things that you can help us all to understand better. Why don't you first, let's lay out some basics. I told you I lost 25 pounds in the last 6 to 7 months. I'm opening myself up to critique here because I'm going to tell you exactly what I did. But I went cold turkey on white bread, and I skipped meals, and I worked out like a maniac. That was what I did. I ate better cold turkey on white bread. I mean, if I had a hamburger, I threw the bread out. I mean, it's that kind of thing. It was like, for me, for whatever, my body type, whatever, the damn bread, just pure weight gain. And that's more of a caloric restriction. That's how you would describe what I did?
In part, but it's not just that. You could eat the same calories if you took inflammatory foods out, but calories remaining the same, you would still see an improvement of health. Grains that you mentioned are on a list that I call the core four. Those are grains, primarily the processed gluten-containing grains, and then industrial seed oils, which you took out too when you took out white bread primarily. You took a lot of sources of it when it comes to things like canola oil and vegetable oil, soybean oil, these industrial seed, high omega-6, pro-inflammatory oils, and then dairy and sugar. So when you take out grains and pastas and pastries and things like that, you're removing a lot of those core four, which are calorically dense. You can get a lot of calories from that, but it's so much more than that. Our body's less of a calculator and more of a chemistry lab. And the foods that we eat actually instruct our biochemistry. It influences the microbiome, which in 75, 80% of the immune system. It's all the trillions of bacteria in our gut. So when you raise inflammation levels up, the foods we eat are actually, again, like I mentioned, it's not so much like a numbers in, numbers out sort of calorie thing, as much as it is this feedback to your biochemistry. And it causes either a ripple effect of balance or a ripple effect of imbalance. So every food we eat either feeds inflammation or fights it. It raises insulin up or modulates it and brings it down. It brings blood sugar up or brings it down. All of this cascade of feedback it gets from the food we eat really plays a part. 500 calories of broccoli and avocados is going to influence the body completely different than 500 calories of breads and pastas.
Now, the reason I bring it up describing myself and using the phrase caloric restriction, because nothing I described to you would fall into the classification of intermittent fasting, would it? And nothing I described to you was fasting. I mean, look, I'm like most people. I can probably do a few Google searches. I've probably done some in the past. I've read things, but I don't think I've applied, and you can use me as a guinea pig, really. People can learn from it. I'm completely open here. But let's take what I've told you so far using my crazy example. It's not really crazy. I'm actually pretty proud of it. But anyways, the fasting part. Introduce me to the notion of the concept of intermittent fasting and how that starts to play a role building on everything you've said so far.
I think it's great what you did. I'm proud of you too. I think cutting out inflammatory foods is a wonderful thing. And that's what I advocate for people to do as a starting point. And then I would say that paired with some smart, measured, flexible intermittent fasting windows is a way to enhance what your body can do. So food is primary. I don't think you can fast your way out of a poor diet. So you're dealing with the foundational stuff. I think that's where everybody should be starting, because that starts to get your blood sugar more balanced. That lowers inflammation levels. That gets your body a little bit more stable to do intermittent fasting in a healthy way, in a sustainable way, not in a crash, I'm going to starve myself sort of way, which is the antithesis of what we want. And from a health standpoint, from a functional medicine standpoint, I want people to actually leverage the benefits of these things long term. So intermittent fasting is a break from eating. And I think there's obviously a time to eat and a time to fast. It's about both sides of that coin. Going back to that larger genetic, epigenetic, evolutionary mismatch that I mentioned earlier, that 10,000 years remaining primarily the same from a DNA standpoint, but yet our world has changed in such a dramatic way in a very finite period of time. Well, humans from an ancestral health perspective would have gone through times of fasting because of food scarcity and food availability, basically. That has changed very much in our modern times as well for a large part of the human race. I know that there's still a lot of food insecurity that we need. I mean, it's a completely different conversation. But for the majority of the modern Western society, we are snacking and eating, and we're having our eating window has grown larger and larger. And then even more so, we are eating foods that are very disruptive to our biochemistry, like I mentioned. So it's an amplified detrimental effect on our biochemistry. Intermittent fasting, there's an explosion of research over the past 10, 15, 20 years looking at the far-reaching health benefits of different types of intermittent fasting. The one that I explore in my new book, in Intuitive Fasting, is a very specific type of intermittent fasting called time-restricted feeding. It's bringing your eating windows for very specific windows throughout the day. There can be either a 8-hour eating window, a 12-hour eating window, less than that. These vacillating, ebbing and flowing eating windows throughout the day have been shown in multiple studies to be very beneficial at modulating our biochemistry. Taking that food medicine that you started with, taking out that junk food, focusing on good things, and then you're just bringing your eating windows into very specific times throughout the day to enhance the health benefits.
Will, let me get you to stop for a second, just so I can clarify. Map it out. Let's just say we're looking at a 7-day week or a 5-day week, whatever, Monday through Friday. They're not going to get it all just in this one interview, but give them a basic understanding. You're talking about windows right away. Okay, most people, it's going to fly by them. They're waking up. That's the first thing they're doing, right? They're going to sleep and they're waking up. I wake up on Monday morning. Map out what a week looks like for somebody who has not been doing intermittent fasting and starts to go down that path. What does it look like concretely?
Week 1 in the book, in Intuitive Fasting, I made it 12-12. Let me just preface all of this. My day job is I started one of the first functional medicine telehealth centers in the world over a decade ago. So from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. throughout the week, I am talking to people about this. Everything I write about and I research about is born out of my clinical practice. And I've seen how these things work amazingly in just everyday normal people. They don't have to be a health connoisseur or aficionado for this sort of thing. Week 1 is a 12-12, which I think is so underappreciated in many ways, because the 12-12 is basically you have 24 hours in a day, right? I mean, 12 hours you're eating, 12 hours you're fasting. So basically you have from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., depending on what you want. You can move it to work with your schedule. It doesn't have to be super dogmatic. And you are just, it's what it is. It's preventing a lot of late night snacking. So you're allowing proper 12 hours in the evening through the night until you break the fast at breakfast, hence its name, in the morning. That is wonderful because it allows your body to repair at night.
To clarify, you're saying you can only eat 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Whatever you're going to eat, it's going to only be in that window, nothing outside that window.
Yeah. Going back to our earlier conversation about calories, the research around time-restricted feeding specifically, and many other types of intermittent fasting, showed that this is not due to caloric restriction. If you controlled for calories in one group that ate their calories over a broader period and one group that ate it in a slightly tighter window, you saw improved benefits, meaning lower inflammation, better blood sugar control, increased fat burning. All the health measures that you want to see are in the time-restricted feeding. And in this example, 12-12 is very moderate. It's not an extreme way of eating at all. It's just going back to that old adage of don't eat too late at night. Well, it's basically what we're substantiating here and the mechanisms at play here, because it's giving your body a time to repair. Through the night, your body can upregulate something called autophagy. It's sort of our cellular recycling. Our body's a way to repair our brain and anti-aging mechanisms, all the amazing things that you want your body to be repairing and renewing throughout the night as you sleep. And then when you go back to eating in the morning, you would be breaking that fast. So that's 12-12. Week 2, I lean into it a bit more to about a 16 to 18 hour fast. That's something that I do a lot of my days when I'm consulting patients online. I'll do a 6-hour eating window, like 12 to 6 p.m.
You're skipping breakfast.
I'm skipping breakfast, yeah, but I'm getting my calories in that 6-hour window. So I'm not eating less, I'm just eating in a tighter window. And I'm allowing my body a deeper fast through the morning, basically, until I break my fast at lunch. And then I'm eating all my calories in that 6-hour window. Then in the evening, I stop eating until lunch the next day. There's a lot of studies showing that 16 to 18 hour, and you can have some flexibility there, has been shown amazingly at reversing some of these metabolic issues that you mentioned that so many people are having. When you're talking about obesity and type 2 diabetes and these different inflammatory problems, autoimmune issues, we can abate that disruption of our biochemistry by allowing our body to repair. Again, a lot of these pathways are there. They've always been there. They've been there for 10,000 years. They're lying dormant in many ways because we're never allowing our body the time to upregulate. So some things like autophagy or repair mechanisms, or increasing something called beta hydroxybutyrate or BHB, which is a ketone body. It is known in the studies as the fourth macronutrient. So we have protein, fats, carbs, and ketones. It's not just a way to burn fat, which a lot of times people are excited about fasting because it puts you in ketosis, it increasing fat burning. Yes, that is true. But it also acts as a signaling molecule, which repairs a lot of things that need to be repaired. One of them is it lowers inflammation that I mentioned earlier. Cutting out those inflammatory foods, cutting out white bread, it's inflammatory. Well, how can we enhance the anti-inflammatory effect in the body? It's tapping into this fourth macronutrient, which lowers things like, not to get super sciencey here, but things like NF-kappa B and the NLRP3 inflammasome. These are high in a lot of these people with metabolic issues and obesity and autoimmune issues. We can lower that. You did that. You lowered inflammation by taking out the white bread. So let's bring in more anti-inflammatory effects beyond that. And that's a tool you can leverage and take it to the next level with some gentle, flexible, intermittent fasting windows. And then we go a little bit deeper for week 3, and then we loosen back up in week 4.
Let me keep you at week 2 for a moment. And I want to add 2 things also about my particular situation. I generally don't drink alcohol, so I'm lucky if I drink 6 beers a year, lucky. And I think naturally, I already do the 12-12. I pretty much naturally already do that. Give me an idea though, without getting into, crazy detail, but give me an idea on your second week. You've got that 6-hour window. What does your eating look like? What are you eating in that 6-hour window, kind of a lunch dinner thing? What does your food intake look? What's going down your pie hole, so to speak?
I'm at the clinic here, so I don't have a full kitchen. So I'm typically packing my lunch and bringing it into the clinic. When I'm fasting, a lot of times people ask me, well, what constitutes breaking a fast? I'm having drinks without any calories. So think tea. I like Earl Grey tea because it has bergamot, which is a citrus from Calabria in Italy. It's been shown to support these autophagy pathways as well.
I drink green tea all day long, so there you go. Unsweetened, no sugar.
Perfect. So the EGCG in there is great. These catechins that are very reparative at lowering inflammation again and supporting optimal health. So having a couple cups of green tea or black tea or oolong tea or pu'er tea or any type of tea is fine. Herbal tea if you're sensitive to caffeine. Coffee is fine as well. And then I break my fast at lunch and I'm having normally this big salad that has wild caught fish on it, avocados, extra virgin olive oil on it, maybe some nuts and seeds crumbled on top. Some sort of, think pescatarian keto. And that's what ketotarian is, which is the name of my first book. With intuitive fasting, I wanted people to show this clean, ketogenic, that's cyclical. You're not always in ketosis, you're just spending times in ketosis, which is where the synergy happens with our biochemistry. You're having that for lunch. I will typically have a smoothie as well with like a coconut milk or almond milk as a base, maybe some berries, and I pre-make this and I'm bringing this in a shaker bottle with maybe some collagen protein, or you can get like a plant-based hemp protein, or there's Incan South American nut that's called sacha inchi, which has high fats. Lots of essential amino acids in there as well. Blend it up. It takes a couple minutes to make the smoothie.
But that's lunch. Most Americans at their current eating habits and current size, they're going to eat your lunch and be hungry in 5 minutes. Is that fair?
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. They will at the first side of things because they're stuck in this sugar burning mode. So it's almost like kindling on the fire where your body is used to burning lots of simple carbohydrates and sugar and things that turn into sugar at the beginning. So yeah, when you're taking out the garbage and the junk food and the refined, that's the kindlings going off. We want to start training the metabolism to put that log on the fire or burning fat for fuel or being fat adapted and burning our own fat. That takes time. So you're right. There is the time that's known as, I say it's known, but I call it a metabolic purgatory place where you're not fully fat adapted. You're off of the addictive, refined sugar, hangry monster feeding machine. And there is that adaptation time, absolutely. But what I would advocate for is for people not to be hypocaloric during this time. If what I just ate isn't enough for you, eat until satiety. There's no reason why you can't eat more of the good things that you want to be focusing on. And that's what I want to get people away from.
It's more about the window initially, right? Getting used to these fasting windows.
Exactly. So if you need more calories because of your activity level or because this is new to you, then eat more. That's fine. Increase the serving size, bring more food in. That's why I included in the book 65 some recipes in there that are very easy, very doable. You don't have to be Martha Stewart living in the kitchen all day long to make it look great and taste great. So that's what I'm having for lunch. But if you need to have more to increase, go until satiety, that's completely fine.
Take me to dinner. What does that 6-hour window end up looking like?
I'll have these sea snacks, which are seaweed snacks. It's common in Asia, but it's not so common here in the States. But I really love these sea snacks, which are high in a lot of minerals. They're baked in olive oil, which you get healthy fats. And maybe I should just reference this too. Fats and protein, fats specifically, are very satiating and very calorically dense too. So when I'm adding things like MCT oil or coconut oil or the things like avocados, the extra virgin olive oil on these foods, it does curb appetite. I mean, a little goes a long way as far as the amount of caloric density and nutrient density these foods have.
I've become a huge avocado fan in this part of the world. I mean, it's so easy to find avocados everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they're a great source of fiber, which is also filling B vitamins as monounsaturated fats. Vegan keto or vegetarian keto, healthy fat foods are a good idea. They're satiating and good for the human body. I'll have nuts and seeds or these seaweed snacks in between lunch and dinner. And then for dinner, I'll have normally another pescatarian way of eating. What maybe it be like a wild-caught salmon steak or a tuna steak or grass-fed beef like burgers. I'll have that sometimes with lots of sauteed vegetables. And then typically some sort of dessert with almond flour and it's sweetened with honey or maple syrup. My wife makes blueberry crumble with almond flour and blueberries and it's sweetened with maple syrup. So you could do that for dinner. There's this recipe in the book, avocado fries again, where they're crusted with almond flour, and there's this chipotle aioli dressing. So I'm eating amply throughout the day. I'm not counting calories. I don't want to be super arduous with that, but I'm eating until satiety. And I think people should do that as well, as long as they're eating these foods that are very satiating, very nutrient dense, and very good for our bodies and our health. And then they're just eating within that window. I like keeping it simple. And then once you do that for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, you really just own it because you start feeling better, which is encouraging for people. They just want to keep doing it and they don't have to give much thought to it, which helps with the sustainability as well.
Have you said anything to me in this conversation so far, something you've said to me so far where there are critics out there that would say, no, Will's got that wrong, or, I mean, there's some technical things that pass my pay grade. I'm going to have to listen again and take some notes or read the book even tighter, those kinds of things. But are there any critics out there that would be listening and saying, oh no, he's got that wrong? I mean, it all sounds very straightforward and I'm not really detecting something controversial in what you're directing.
I'll be detailed with this answer because I like this question actually a lot. I think it's important to discuss it actually. I think that on the surface, the wide majority of people in the health space and in the non-health space, and I'm talking about the conventional medical side as well as the wellness side of things as well, most people would not disagree with what I just said at all. But you would be hard pressed to say anything and not have some critics in our world today. I mean, the amount of tribalism or pontification where it's like they don't even really look beyond the title of the book or a title of an article and they want to judge and say something.
Big Pharma wants us all on statins till we die.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe there are some people, I don't think in the majority of people, I mean, I have a very measured, moderate approach with these sort of things. And normally the judgment comes when they don't really look into what I'm saying fully, or they'll read a title of the book and think I'm advocating for something extreme. When you talk about fasting, it's actually quite a triggering word for some people, even just that word. Even if they're educated, they know this stuff, they hear this, they're like, he's advocating for an eating disorder. And that's not what I'm advocating for at all.
Listen, America needs an eating disorder in the opposite direction.
Yeah. Just because something's common doesn't mean it's normal. And I think that's the problem here is that they equate ubiquity with normalcy. And they're like, no, he's saying, I mean, any cessation of eating is radical for some people and gets their feathers all in a ruffle. But I'm advocating just for eating healthy foods and just giving your body a bit of break of eating sometimes. For the majority of the human race, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, other societies around the world today don't think that's radical, but somehow there's still this faction of people that think that's radical, but it certainly isn't.
I'll share with you, in the last several months, I've had a lady in my life who is vegetarian, and she's pretty strict. Most of the time we've spent together, I've eaten what she's eaten. And I got to tell you, she has introduced me to, I mean, Vietnam's an easy place to find this. I mean, amazing vegetarian food. But I got to tell you, I mean, I've had dishes where if someone didn't tell me it was vegetarian, I mean, I would have just sat there and consumed it and be like, this is delicious, There's some mindset issues here. And look, I've been there. I'm American. I mean, so I still love burgers and fries and all that kind of stuff. Once you start to get exposed to other ways of thinking, and once you try different foods and different combinations, really, these light bulbs start to happen that you've been describing.
Exactly. And you know what? We live in such an awesome time where let's get some of the best things of modernity where there's so many alternatives. When you talk about the health and wellness world in the 80s and the 90s, we didn't have the variety choices that we have today. If someone wants to have the burger and fries, you mentioned that, can't we come up with some alternatives? Let's get better quality beef, because oftentimes it's what we've done to the cow supply and the beef supply, less about the beef itself. So if we want to get grass-fed organic, and if you talk about price and cost, and some people can't afford that, of course that there is an increased cost sometimes, but if you know where to shop, you can go to places like Aldi and Costco and Walmart that carries grass-fed things if you're in the States. So it's not just about cost. And when you stop spending money on all the junk that we spend on, we're going to have more money to spend on healthy foods. So grass-fed beef, if you want that burger and fries, that quintessential American meal, then go for better beef. Like you did, take off the bun.
Go to sweet potato fries.
Exactly. Go to sweet potato fries, bake them, or you can even fry them in avocado oil instead of the industrial seed oils that I mentioned earlier. There's modifications to just about everything today. We go to cereal, to different bread options. There's many healthier versions of things where you don't have to eat like a rabbit to be healthy. You can really eat a variety of foods. There's really no excuse other than not being empowered and not being educated on this. Because I think that's the biggest problem. People just don't know where to shop. They don't know what to look for. So I think conversations like this are really helpful because it's hopefully equipping them with having this agency over their health.
Let me take you to one particular food item, which has been controversial over the course of my lifetime. I can remember my father, who's a doctor and not nutritional doctor, not in your headspace, but nonetheless, you know how doctors are, even if it's not their field. Something came out, I don't know what particular decade, maybe it was in the 80s, and it was like, no eggs, cholesterol, stop eating eggs. For a long stretch, for those, I don't know how long it was. I mean, I know I took eggs out of my diet completely when I was living in the States. Now, it's really interesting. You come to a country like Vietnam, like I said, least obese country in the world. These folks know about eggs. They might not have all of the science and the research written down like you do, but they instinctively, from experience, know that eggs are extremely important because there is no shortage of eggs in the diet here.
I mean, it is. It's one of nature's multivitamins in many ways. The yolk specifically has all amazing choline, which is a precursor to acetylcholine for our brain, healthy omega fats, which we need for cardiovascular health, other B vitamins. I mean, so many health benefits there. And there are people that have egg sensitivities. Mainly that's in the egg white, the albumin in the egg white. Barring if you don't have an egg sensitivity, the rest of the human race can really benefit from having at least more of that in their diet. It has been demonized. You mentioned that. I mean, it was in the 80s, even the 90s. It was very much low-fat craze. Eggs took a big hit there.
Stop eating eggs, take statins.
That was the mantra, but that is an oversimplified, reductionist approach to the larger context of the conversation. Context matters. We don't like context in the way that we like to have conversations. We like broad sweeping, overgeneralized statements about this is bad and this is good. Well, the truth typically is somewhere in the middle, and that is definitely truth for things like eggs, which is mainly the conversations around cholesterol and saturated fats. So it's the diet heart hypothesis that dietary saturated fats, dietary cholesterol would somehow clog our arteries and increase heart attack and stroke risk. So now what we're seeing into the 21st century, we're seeing time and time again in scientific journals, in the medical literature, that there's actually very little to no correlation between these whole food-based things like grass-fed beef and eggs, the impact on cardiovascular risk factors or heart attack and stroke. And actually, a lot of mainstream institutions are actually lifting their restrictions on these things because it's been shown time and time again to actually not increase our risk factors. Total cholesterol, which can increase for some people specifically if they're eating more eggs or eating more grass-fed beef or even plant-based fats like coconut oil, their cholesterol levels can raise. But total cholesterol is a pretty poor predictor by itself for assessing if you're going to get a heart attack or stroke. It's like flipping a coin. About a half of people who have heart attacks and strokes actually have normal to low cholesterol. It may be a problem, it may not. It's about a 50-50 odd here. But the problem is that you have to look at the quality of the cholesterol, not just the quantity. Yes, these foods like eggs or grass-fed beef or coconut oil can raise your total cholesterol, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. And there have been many studies that have shown that these foods actually improve things like HDL, which is our good cholesterol, or raise something called large buoyant LDL particles, which is a specific type of LDL particles, which is actually protein, which are a fluffy cotton ball sort of things, and that's the analogy that's used, which are protective just like HDL, the good cholesterol. The point being is that you want to look at the total context of your cholesterol, your lipid panel. You are not going to get that from just running a total cholesterol, and if it's above 200, give them a statin drug, because again, that's a very simplified one snapshot in time thing. You could have a total cholesterol of 250 and it could be great quality, or you could have a cholesterol of 250 and have really bad quality. You have to run what's called a nuclear magnetic resonance test, or NMR test, that looks at, they call it a subfractionation of particles. These are conventional labs. These aren't just strange functional medicine labs that we run, like Quest, LabCorp in the States. You can get them across the world looking at the subfractionation of particles. Because what you don't want is something called small, dense LDL particles. These are little rusted BB bullets that can tear through arterial walls. But things like eggs and grass-fed beef or coconut oil have not been shown to increase these small, dense LDL particles. You know what has been is that white bread, sugar, and all the refined garbage stuff that we talked about. Those things will raise all the bad markers that you don't want. They will raise small, dense LDL particles. They will raise triglycerides. They will lower your HDL. They will raise your blood sugar, A1C. All the things you don't want, that stuff will do. These healthy, whole food-based fats actually won't do that.
As we wind down, let me take you back to the mental side of the equation. And I don't know for some people if the question I'm going to ask can be asked perfectly without some people feeling like, oh my gosh, Mike is being mean. And I'm not being mean. But look, as a guy who grew up in the 80s, when I was a teenager, I would see the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. And generally, the women that were on the covers were probably 5'7" to 5'10", probably 115 to 125 pounds. They were skinny, tall girls, skinny, tall women. How everybody, like I said, you can't say anything these days without somebody going to say, Mike, you said it wrong. Okay. But today, that same Sports Illustrated has switched to probably the same height women, but they've probably literally added an extra 100 pounds to the models. And the message has become, accept yourself. It's okay. I've just listened to you lay out some really strong thoughts, details, pieces of research, perspectives for the last 45 minutes. But you're up against a system that, yes, you've said, okay, you've got experience with people coming over to your side. And I mean, I'm here. I want to listen. There's a whole army of folks out there that want to justify the size of America. They want to justify the size of the United Kingdom. They want to rationalize it and say it's okay. And I think the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, again, whether people like it or not, it's an interesting cultural phenomena in the sense that we have now got to the point where we want young people, young women, young men to look at that SI issue and accept, frankly, obesity. You're over here on one side. Look, you're a very sensitive guy. You're not trying to be mean to anybody or anything like that. I'm not trying to be either. This is like two boxers in the ring fighting almost.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you look at both sides again, this tribalism that happens. You have the old thought that it comes with a lot of shame, I think, for a lot of people, where they think that you can shame somebody to health, or if you can bring up enough negativity and enough shame and obsession about weight and size, that's going to somehow create a great result in our culture. And then you have the other side that's completely rebelling against that. That is like, no, any size is fine. And look, if you want to be any size that you want to be, or if you are at where you're at this point of your life journey and your health journey, of course, you are not advocating for anybody to shame or demonize anybody. That's absolutely true. I think that as a functional medicine practitioner, I'm seeing people at different points of their journey, but they know where they're at now isn't where they want to be. Of course, even when we're talking about decreasing things like obesity and decreasing things like insulin resistance and inflammatory problems, doesn't mean everybody's going to be the same size. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to be a 6 foot tall supermodel. That's not what I'm saying here. I'm saying there's still going to be people of all different sizes, and that's beautiful, and God created you, and there's no shame in that whatsoever. But I do agree with you in the fact that glamorizing obesity is a problem. It is this reductionist thinking again. It's like, we don't care about labs. We don't care about looking at someone's A1C. We don't care at looking at their health. When you look at insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, and that doubles your risk for heart attack and stroke, doubles your risk for a shorter lifespan, 4 to 10 years off of your life. If you really loved somebody, if you really cared about somebody, you would actually, out of love, say, look, we accept you for who you are, where you're at now, but saying that you should stay there. We want you on this earth longer. We actually want you to be healthier, to live the life you were created for. And that doesn't mean you're going to be real thin and anorexic and a 6 foot tall supermodel, but it does mean you're going to be a healthier version of yourself. Like my earlier statement, the truth somewhere in the middle. Shaming people into health isn't right, but suspending facts isn't right either.
How has your perspective moved or shifted in the last 1 year? For example, when we have this pandemic, and again, I'm in a country where I think there's been a grand total, it's 100 million people and a grand total of maybe 50 deaths, 50, a couple dozen people. I'm curious, though, your perspective now that we start to wrap our arms around COVID. Of course, there are going to be outliers. There are going to be perfectly healthy people that get COVID and die. But it sure seems like, from my cursory analysis, it sure seems like every time I hear medical professionals speak, that so many of the people that are dying are morbidly obese. The medical phraseology that I will hear is morbidly obese. It sure seems like if we're going to be dealing with something like COVID, it could ramp up, or it could change how we speak about weight, don't you think, in the future? If we're going to be stuck with this kind of a disease for a long time, and we know that those folks that are carrying the extra weight are really at the highest risk, what then?
I think it's a missing part of the conversation that's not really happening in a large scale in the United States. Some colleagues of mine, medical doctors, are speaking about this and saying, why isn't this part of the discussion? Why isn't this here? When we look at the statistics, so glaringly obvious that your increased risk of dying and getting these more severe manifestations of COVID-19 are largely due to metabolic disorders. And these things are largely improvable, healable, reversible things. You can change it with lifestyle, decrease your risk factors tremendously. The fact that we're not talking about that, educating people, empowering people, maybe it's because it's so new and America is not good at having these conversations anyways, let alone in a pandemic. Hopefully this is part of the long game of educating and empowering people that the silver lining in this time is that we have a virus that we actually can decrease risk factors quite dramatically. And like you mentioned, of course, outliers and exceptions to what I just said, but the vast majority of people that are getting the worst outcomes of COVID are people that are on that insulin resistant spectrum that I mentioned, that have vitamin D deficiency, that have the type 2 diabetes, that have the obesity. They're the ones, sadly, that are ones that are suffering the most. So let's empower them. Let's give them tools. Let's educate them on how to have agency over their health, decrease those risk factors dramatically. Hopefully that's going to be a part of the longer conversation, because unlike in 1918 with Spanish flu pandemic, that was taking out young soldiers, young people. This is not taking out people like that. This is largely taking out people that have some influence over if this virus is going to kill them or not.
I should have asked this at the beginning, but give me a quick trigger. What sent you down this path? How old were you when you knew you were going down this particular life path to figure out these particular issues? What was the trigger? Was there some kind of brief trigger you can relay to us?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it started very, very young. I realized in hindsight, I was probably a really strange kid, but my dad was a professional bodybuilder in the 80s and 90s. I thought it was normal to have your dad lubed up in baby oil and turquoise Speedos and like on stage doing these things. He was interested in health and wellness and that sort of fitness world. That informed my brain as a very young age of, okay, we walked through the health food store in the 80s and 90s, and like, this is what food looked like for us. And I saw that juxtaposition of what I was eating and what my friends were eating at school. The seed of what I'm doing today actually began when I was very, very little, like 7, 8 years old. But then I remember reading a book. It was called Patient Heal Thyself by a guy named Jordan Rubin, who is doing amazing things even now in the health world. But he healed himself from Crohn's disease with food. I was probably 13, 14 years old maybe when I read that book. And then that evolved into me wanting to be formally trained in this. So throughout my whole high school career, I knew what I wanted to do when I graduated from high school. One thing led to another. I just was singularly focused on that path, and I graduated with school and started writing about it and speaking about it. There would be people in different states and countries that needed access to this stuff. That's when we started one of the first telehealth clinics over a decade ago. It's always been a passion of mine. Started out when I was really young and just evolved until now.
Very cool stuff. The book, Intuitive Fasting, the flexible 4-week intermittent fasting plan to recharge your metabolism and renew your health. That's a pretty good mouthful to say for the first time and get it exactly right. That's a decent title. I'm an author too, so that's a decent title. I got to give you props on that. Where can we send people? Where would you like to direct them to beyond Amazon to buy the book and all that fun stuff? Where do you want to send people?
Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me on. Everything's at drwillcole.com. That's drwillcole.com, on Instagram at Dr. Will Cole, all the social media things. That's where I'm at.
Listen, I'd love to have you on again. Great stuff. The health conversations are awesome. And you're the kind of guy where I can see that, and you know, by the way I ask questions, like I just sit there and just, okay, next question. I don't even have anything written down in front of me. I'm just like,
I love it.
just rambling them off.
I mean, you're obviously great at this. It's so interesting. And you ask questions that aren't like the typical health questions that I get, which I like. You're in tune with what the listener wants to know. Like even just what are you eating within that window? And I loved it. So anytime you want me to have back on.
Well, because I want to know, because I'm going to go do it. It's real simple.
Yeah.
We'll definitely do it again. I appreciate it. I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.